allowing me to present and share some information that I'm actually pretty passionate about. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. It is never my desire to have death by PowerPoint, but there's going to be a few PowerPoint slides today. Not that many though, luckily. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. All right, I'm going to start from the beginning. Okay, can I just get a thumbs up if folks can see my? Okay, awesome. All right. Thank you so much for being here today and allowing me to be here and talk to you about a presentation that I call the Second Chance Solution, how cooperatives can work to change their communities through employment. And yeah, I'm not sure how many of you actually saw my introduction or have heard a little bit about who I am and what I do, but I'll give an introduction here, talk a bit about a definition about a second chance employment, which is what we're primarily going to be talking about today, give some stats, talk about why this is actually a very important topic, and then how co-ops fit in this into this very important topic, and give some really easy ways to have more inclusive hiring, easy and free, which is even better, easy and free ways to have more inclusive hiring practices when it comes to including folks who have maybe some more challenged and diverse backgrounds. So first of all, my name, Ty Reed, and what all those letters after my name mean is that, frankly, I've been a really lucky guy. I've been lucky enough to graduate with a couple of degrees from the University of Washington. I hold a professional in human resources designation, which allows me to have an understanding of the ways that employers think about recruitment and retainment of employees. I'm also a certified workforce development professional, which means that I also spend a lot of time talking to job seekers about the needs that they have. And because of the personal history that I have achieved a certified peer counselor designation in Washington State. As a person who happens to be in alcohol and drug recovery, I get to use my experience to help others who are kind of walking that same road, and I feel really honored to be able to do that. My day job is I work as a project manager for Workforce Snohomish, which is one of the 12 workforce development councils in Washington State. We are a nonprofit, and we work with businesses to help them attract, retain, and retrain their talent in many ways. And then the absolute passion that I engage in on a daily basis is my nonprofit Recovery Career Services. And what we do is focus on providing career coaching and employment guidance at no cost to individuals that are in recovery from addiction, homelessness, and past criminal justice involvement. And I feel really, really lucky to be able to do that work as well. And you can check out my website at recoveryandwork.org. We've never met each other before. And recently, the movie Spider-Man came out. And when I was growing up, I was a huge Spider-Man fan. I could really relate to him. And so there's three main ways that I'm like Spider-Man that may be surprising to you, but hopefully interesting as well. Number one, super nerdy teen, not popular at all, couldn't get a date, thick glasses, absolutely fit the mold that way. The other thing is that I look really great in red and blue. I know I'm not wearing it today, certainly not the skin tight variety, but red and blue in general goes very well against my skin tone, I have to say. And then the last thing is that my origin story, just like Spider-Man's origin story, kind of defines the work that I do and the person that I am today. And I will give you kind of a brief overview of what that story is by flashing back to 2007. That was a big year for me. So Irreplaceable by Beyonce was the top song of the year. And there were some really great things kind of going on in my life, quite frankly. My then wife and I bought this big old house in Snohomish County. I had just been recognized for year-over-year sales growth, working for a Fortune 50 company, actually, as a sales and business development representative. And so I was working professionally and doing exactly what I wanted. I was highly paid, highly visible, highly respected, and highly recognized. But I also had a secret. I had a pretty significant alcohol and drug problem, and I was living a double life. And quite frankly, I didn't like the person that I was in either one of those lives. By day, I was this corporate salesperson who was walking through nice offices and talking to nice people. And then by night, I was on the streets of Seattle chasing drugs. And it was exhausting and tiring. And at the time, it seemed like because I had such a good handle on my professional life that would cover up all the issues that were going on in my personal life. But unfortunately, many of us remember that in 2008, something kind of big happened, a recession, and I lost my high-paying job. Not so long after that, just coincidentally, my marriage fell apart. And that period really starts what I describe often as a slow motion train wreck. Over the next 5 or 6 years, I still worked. I still had some relative success professionally, but my personal life got worse and worse until 2014, when I found myself an unemployable, homeless drug addict on the streets of Seattle. And that really started a pretty dark period. It started a couple of years that were kind of tough. I was in and out of jail multiple times. I was committed to a mental institution, quite frankly, and was somehow lucky enough to survive a couple of suicide attempts. And that picture that's in the lower middle of the screen, that is the picture they took the day that I entered rehab for the last time. I was fresh off being homeless for a couple of years. And when I started to put my life back together in 2016, one of the first things I had to do was find a job, but I wasn't exactly the dream candidate that employers would think about. I hadn't worked for 2 years. I had really horrible credit, and I had multiple criminal convictions. So as a result, despite having had an MBA from the University of Washington and having had a bunch of really great sales experience in the corporate world, the first job that I was able to get was part-time as a janitor. And that's not because that was the first job I applied to. It was because that was really the only thing available to me. I had multiple employers turn me down because of my criminal convictions, not felonies, by the way, just misdemeanors. So as I progressed in my sobriety, I kept thinking about ways that I could give back to folks who might be walking the same path. And I kept coming back to this idea of employment and how important it is for folks that are rebuilding their lives. And frankly, reason that if somebody like me, who interviews pretty well, because I do interview pretty well, and who has had the advantages that I had with education and with work experience, if somebody like me has such a tough time, then folks who haven't been as lucky as me probably have a much tougher time than I did. And that's where my nonprofit Recovery Career Services was born out of. And as I mentioned, what we focus on are helping individuals with second chance employment. And SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, a national organization made up of human resources professionals, identifies second chance employment as the act of employing formerly incarcerated individuals, people in recovery, or other applicants whose choices and situations have disadvantaged them in obtaining stable employment. And I read that word for word only because it's a great kind of overall broad definition of what second chance employment is. But I want to make sure I also pause to point out what second chance employment is and what it isn't. To me, what it is an equal exchange of value. So often when people think about providing employment opportunities for some of these folks that have disadvantaged backgrounds in some way, and I would certainly say that someone who has been involved with the criminal justice system, regardless of race, certainly has some disadvantages in their background. So often when people think about providing employment opportunity, they think about it as charity or handout. It absolutely is not that. Second chance employment is about an equal exchange of value. You're going to get an employee who's going to bring their enthusiasm and their job experience, in some cases, if they have job experience, and their persistence, because anytime you're coming from a tough background like this, you've got to have some persistence and perseverance. They're going to bring that to your company, and in exchange, they're going to get some stuff from you as well. They're going to get a paycheck. Hopefully, they're going to get some benefits, and hopefully, they're going to gain some skills that will help them as they move further through their careers. So this is not about sacrificing profits simply for the warm and fuzzies and to say that you help the community. Certainly, that can be a byproduct, but it really is about providing equal opportunity to individuals who have already paid their debt to the court system and to society, and allowing them to progress with their lives. So often what happens is after people complete the sentence that the justice system has given them, they are then further financially sentenced by employers who say that you haven't suffered enough, and because of what happened in your past, we're not going to provide you employment opportunity. So we're going to further punish you financially to prevent you from gaining a foothold as a contributing member of society. That's not the type of society that I want to live in. and for employers who recognize the importance of hiring individuals who have these backgrounds. Luckily, that's not the society they want to live in either. They recognize the importance of providing these opportunities for folks. For any of you that don't know, the US has a pretty significant criminal justice problem, and it's in a lot of different ways, but the number one way is the United States by far has the highest incarceration rate in the world. It's not even close. And that, as a result, has led to a lot of big numbers in many areas. According to the FBI and the Department of Justice, anywhere between 70 and 77 million adults in the US have a criminal record. To put that in perspective, that's 1 in 3 adults, or that's actually also more people with criminal records than actually have bachelor's degrees. So that also gives you an idea of the scope of the issue. What that really says is, I'm going to guess that there's some folks on here that know folks that have criminal justice backgrounds. And you can't count me, by the way. You know me, but you can't count me. I'm going to guess that some folks on this call, they probably know some folks that have been, unfortunately, involved in the criminal justice system. In Washington state alone, there's over 2 million people that have a criminal record. And one of the other things, this is according to Washington State Patrol, one of the other things I need to point out here is that about 90% of those people have absolutely no involvement, no current involvement with the criminal justice system. And what do I mean by that? I mean that they're not on probation, they're not on parole, they're not making they're not doing community service, and they're not making restitution to the court. So what that means is we have a huge number of people who at some point in their lives have gotten a criminal conviction and are now simply dragging those criminal records around with them and being denied opportunity in not only employment, often in education, because depending on the type of criminal transgression you have, you're not eligible for federal loans, and also in housing, because in many cases, landlords will run background checks, and if you have any criminal convictions, they won't rent to you. So it's a pretty significant problem, and people are being denied opportunity in many different areas. And just some general stats, over 600,000 people are released annually from prison. That's both state prison and federal prison. And about another 9 million people cycle through local jails. And obviously the local jail system in this country is pretty large. So there's a huge number of people that are impacted by the criminal justice system individually. And then of course, there's the secondary impacts that this has on families of folks who are involved in the criminal justice system. And there's some pretty significant issues. So I was thinking about a way to kind of talk about one of the biggest issues, or at least what I think the biggest issue is. Remember back at the beginning of COVID, when you would go somewhere and everybody's masked up and then somebody coughs or they sneezes and like everybody would kind of look at them. It's almost like you had the scarlet letter C, right? And so its stigma is a significant issue for folks, because once you are identified as someone who has a criminal conviction, it's almost like you're wearing this scarlet letter on you, because there's so much stigma attached to what someone who has criminal convictions is like. When the truth really is that it's pretty easy to end up with a criminal conviction in this country. Number one, because there's a lot of laws, just in general. But number two, if you live in an area where your neighborhood is heavily policed, again, regardless of race, you have a pretty good shot of ending up with criminal convictions, and you can also just be unlucky. So I'm going to just kind of ask a couple questions here. You don't have to out yourself, but just think about this. Have you ever had a time in your life where you had too much to drink and got behind the wheel and maybe drove when you shouldn't? If that's the case, you're pretty lucky you didn't end up with a DUI or something worse, like hurt somebody. Have you ever been in a physical altercation in your life? If that's the case, then you're probably pretty lucky you didn't end up with an assault charge or something worse. And before weed was legal in this state, did you ever walk around with some weed in your pocket or smoke a little bit of weed? Well, if any of those three things are true for you, you're lucky you didn't end up with a criminal conviction. And quite often the difference between having a conviction and not having a conviction is simply luck. Now, certainly there are some people who, like me, quite frankly, that end up with multiple criminal convictions because they were out doing things that should have gotten them multiple criminal convictions. I'm not saying that that's not the case, but in many cases, especially for folks that only have a single charge, it's simply luck and location that are the difference between them and the folks sitting across from them at the interviewer's table. So that stigma is big. And although Washington State has actually done a really nice job in the last few years of banning the box, and what I mean by that is there, before 2018 on an application, there used to be a box that you'd have to check that if you'd ever been convicted of a crime, check this box. And unfortunately, what that meant for many of us with past criminal convictions is that you wouldn't get a call back. As a matter of fact, studies have shown that people who actually had to admit up front that they had past criminal justice involvement were anywhere from 60 to 300% less likely to get a call back for a first interview. And so Washington State has done a great job of doing away with that box that makes people admit it before the interview, which has resulted in more individuals actually getting an opportunity to sit down with hiring managers. But what it hasn't changed is that other box, which is that box full of biases that folks carry about people who have past criminal justice involvement. And so until we can work on the hearts and minds of people, that stigma is still going to be a significant barrier to folks being able to find equitable employment. Obviously, unemployment is a big issue because if you don't get a fair chance at employment, and I'm going to, then that's going to have an impact on how much employment you're able to get. I'm going to have a statistic about that and a quiz in just a minute. And then finally, recidivism. Unfortunately, if folks are not given an opportunity to, have gainful employment, many of them will reoffend. So we're going to I'm going to do 3 poll questions now. And John, I'm going to need to depend on you because I cannot see the chat from where I am. So 3 questions. So number 1 poll question about employment after incarceration. What percentage of formerly incarcerated people do you think will be unemployed 1 year after release? And you can just drop your answer into the chat. Is it 25%? Is it 45%? Is it 75%? Or is it 87%?
Pretty much everyone's going with 87.
Almost 75. So not quite that bad, but still 3 out of 4 people 1 year after release are going to be unemployed, which is not a great number. Next question, the unemployment rate. So pre-pandemic, and actually kind of about now, the unemployment rate for the general population was 4%. What do you think the unemployment rate was for those who have criminal convictions? 4%, 10%, 21%, or 27%?
A little bit of a mix here. 27 and 21 are leading.
Okay, 27%. So almost 7 times higher. That's a big number. That's a lot of people who aren't getting fair opportunities at employment. And then the last question, I mentioned recidivism. So more than 2/3 of prisoners are rearrested within 3 years. What do you think the number 1 cause of recidivism is? So recidivism is reoffense and then getting put back into the criminal justice system. Is it poverty? Is it family problems? Is it psychological problems, or is it substance abuse?
Looks like everyone's going with poverty.
Excellent. Yeah, it is. It's poverty. And when you think about it, this kind of makes sense. Everybody has financial realities. Everybody's got to eat. Everybody has to pay some sort of rent probably somewhere. And if not given opportunity to make a living wage and an honest wage, then unfortunately, lots of folks, either out of necessity or because they're just tempted to fall back into their old ways, are going to fall back into their old ways. And this has a number of implications. Number 1, in Washington State, it costs about $42,000 a year to house a prisoner. Number 2, now they're not actually contributing to the tax base. They're not contributing to the community. They're a drain on the community. And the third thing is that they've now created another victim of crime in the community, either a business or an individual. And so this employment really is key to all of these things happening. And employers often, I don't think, understand the role that they have in helping communities remain strong by providing these employment opportunities. And I'll talk a bit more about the importance of that here. I just want to pause here and see if anybody has any questions or any comments on any of those numbers or anything in general. All right. Thanks so much. So why is all of this important? Well, it's important because of stories like Rick. Now, Rick is a fake name, but Rick is the person behind Rick's name is actually a real client that I have worked with in my nonprofit. And Rick's story is unfortunately like the story of a lot of folks who have past criminal justice involvement and who are looking for employment. Rick had some job experience in the past, and he, after being released from incarceration, he actually did a lot of things while he was incarcerated. He got a college degree while he was incarcerated. And a lot of people don't know that if you're in the criminal justice system, you can actually have jobs and manage people. He had a job and he managed people. And when he got out, started applying for positions and actually found a position that he thought was going to work great for him. He went to the interview. He knocked their socks off the interview. As a matter of fact, the hiring manager told Rick that he was the best candidate that she had seen. And if she could, she would hire him on the spot. But all he had to do was get past the criminal background check. Now, he was a little nervous about it, but his criminal convictions didn't have anything to do with the job that he was applying for. So he thought that even if they found those criminal convictions, that maybe he might have a shot of explaining how he was living his life in a different way today versus what he was doing before. Unfortunately, when the HR person called him, they told him that he could come back and apply with them in 7 years because that was the policy that the company had. They didn't take any criminal convictions, regardless of how minor or how long ago, within 7 years. Unfortunately, as a result of those financial realities that I talked about and the fact that he had a family that he was trying to provide for, that had been waiting for him to be released from incarceration, he fell back into his old criminal ways, was rearrested, and is now in the system again. So providing those employment opportunities, and many employers will provide opportunities for basic work. So if someone wants to go and be a janitor like I was, which is necessary and honorable work, that's fine. But as we know, in certain parts of Washington state, it's difficult to live on minimum wage. And if folks aren't given an opportunity to advance and have something more than simply entry-level employment, then they may be tempted to fall back into their old ways. As a parole officer said to me, which is kind of a crude way to put it, but it kind of makes sense. Do you want people showing up to get a good paycheck at your company, or do you want them showing up to take your stereo? It's an unfortunate way to put it, but in many cases, that really is the choice that we're making people make in regards to their financial futures. So how do co-ops fit into this? Pretty well, actually. There's 7 principles that co-ops operate under, and principle number 7, concern for communities, is the principle that I think applies most when it comes to co-ops fitting into this area of second chance hiring and employment opportunity. Communities, it has been shown over and over again that the higher employment or lower unemployment that a community has, there's some things that are grown and some things that are shrunk. So higher employment leads to lower poverty, lower homelessness, lower crime, and a greater tax base from which to draw for services for everyone who's in the community. So again, employment is incredibly important in helping communities stay strong and stay together, and employers of all kinds have a huge role to play in this. But we also can't talk about this without talking about diversity, equity, inclusion. And I just want to talk about each one of these very, very briefly, because we hear DEI thrown out, but I just want to make sure that in the context of second chance employment, I talk about it. Diversity, when folks think about diversity when it comes to hiring, many of us automatically think of what I call the big 2, and the big 2 are race and gender. But diversity of background is also incredibly important. The value of diversity is that it helps to bring different perspectives to organizations when it comes to problem solving or simply building a workforce. And if diversity of background is not also considered, I would argue that employers are missing out on an opportunity to include a valuable perspective in their organizations. Equity. Equity when it comes to second chance employment is absolutely not about providing an employment opportunity for someone who has a criminal justice background at the expense of someone who doesn't. What it's about is saying that there's going to be an equal opportunity regardless of criminal justice background. And I'm going to talk about that just a bit more in one of our last slides when I talk about how we can implement some more inclusive hiring practices in a very easy way. And then finally, inclusion. If we're really serious about including everyone in the opportunities that are available, then we have to include everyone. I truly believe that regardless of past criminal justice involvement, whatever it was, everyone deserves the chance to work. Everyone needs to be included in those opportunities to make a better life for themselves so that we can function well as a society and as a community. So there are some pretty easy ways to have more inclusive hiring. And again, 100% free, all of these are, and depending on your organization, should be fairly easy to implement. So the first thing is that as an organization, if you make a commitment to hire the best candidate, no matter what, then you're almost automatically saying that you're going to be open to hiring folks regardless of criminal background. Because in many cases, the best candidate is going to be that person that you're not going to find out until after the interview that you really, really liked, that might actually have some sort of criminal transgression. So if you commit to hiring the best candidate, then you're going to build a stronger workforce and you're going to be a more inclusive organization. The other thing, and it sounds maybe weird to say this, but slow down. When you're going through your hiring process, slow down a little bit and get curious. So often, what happens is businesses are difficult to run and people are super busy and their lives are very complicated and chaotic in some cases. And so during the hiring process, if we run across an applicant that doesn't exactly fit the mold of what we were looking for because they have a criminal background, so often those applicants' resumes, their applications, they just kind of go into the garbage can. When if the hiring manager or HR person were to just kind of slow down a little bit and get curious about the applicant, they may actually discover that they have someone who should be considered. And here's what I mean by that. As opposed to having a policy where someone is automatically disqualified because of their criminal justice background, if you were to slow down and maybe ask some questions. So it's part of the normal part of screening someone who has past criminal justice involvement is to ask the question, some version of, please explain to us what happened with these criminal convictions. And so you'll get an explanation. But the next question is actually more important. What's been happening in your life since that happened? Because that is going to allow you to get a whole bunch more information and discover whether this is someone who is truly living their lives differently than they did before and is someone that should be seriously considered for employment. I'll use myself as an example. When I got that job as the janitor part-time, I worked at it for about 8 months. The first good job that I got was with a small manufacturer. And in that interview, they asked me what I'd been doing in my life since those criminal convictions occurred. I had been able to point to a bunch of stuff. I was in recovery, so I joined a 12-step program. I had done some community service, so I had volunteered and done a bunch of it and had recommendations about it. Even though I already had an MBA, I went and got some worker retraining so I could learn some new skills. So it was evident that I was committed to living my life differently than I was before. But if they hadn't asked me that question, they never would have known about it. And unless employers take the time to slow down and gather data and get curious, they won't have that information either. The funny thing about bias is that new information often trumps bias. So if we take the time to gather new information, we can help to overcome these preconceived notions that we may have in our minds about what someone is going to be like or whether they can be trusted for that matter. You can also use the nature, time, nature test. And so SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management that I mentioned earlier, recommends that employers who run across applicants who have past criminal justice involvement look at the nature of the crime, the time since the crime happened, and then the nature of the position that they're applying for. So effectively what they're saying is, you're going to take a look at what they did and see if it has anything to do with the job that they're actually going to be doing. So for example, if you're hiring for an accountant position, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense for you to offer that to somebody who got charged with embezzlement last year. That probably isn't too smart. But if you're hiring for a warehouse position or a stocker position, and someone has a drug conviction from a couple of years ago, maybe if you then ask questions about what's been happening in their life since then, and you're satisfied with the answers, then maybe this is somebody you should provide an opportunity for. But until you, again, slow down and start to think about these applicants in a little bit different way, you're never going to know any of that information, especially if you have blanket policies that simply say, we're not going to accept anyone with any criminal background in X number of years. This is all about giving yourself the opportunity to be armed with more information before making a decision that could be bad for your business and bad for the individual as well. Something I alluded to just a little bit earlier, disregard any unrelated history. As a matter of fact, when I often do consulting with employers who are thinking about doing second chance hiring, I encourage them right in their equal employment opportunity statement, the one that says that they don't discriminate based on sex, religion, color, national origin, all of those things. I encourage them to include in that they also don't discriminate in hiring when it comes to unrelated criminal history, because that actually does a couple of things. Number one, that is a signal to applicants that if they apply to your company, that they have a shot. And that's going to get you applicants that you might not otherwise see. That's the first thing. It's also a great signal to your current employees that you care about equity, you care about equality, and that if they happen to know someone, and obviously we all love employee or member referrals in this case, if they happen to know someone who may actually need an opportunity, that you're going to be open to you're going to give them an honest look. Not saying you're going to hire them, but you're at least going to give them an honest look. And quite often for folks like me and millions of others who have criminal justice involvement, an honest look is the best thing we can hope for. I would also encourage, and this is kind of the most powerful thing, to connect with community organizations. And I'm going to talk about, excuse me, I'm going to talk about some community organizations here in just a bit. And there's a reason why you want to connect with community organizations that are serving these populations, regardless of what city that you're in. If you're near a fairly big town in Washington State, there's organizations who actually work with the populations of folks who have past criminal justice involvement, are looking for worker retraining, and are looking to get employment. Goodwill is the one that kind of pops to mind, that is available in virtually every community across Washington State. There are some other organizations as well, depending on where you are, but Goodwill is one that pops to mind, and I will have shared their information here soon on one of the resource pages. But by connecting with these community organizations, number one, all the work that they do with employers, and they love to connect with employers, is absolutely no cost to you. But number two, one of the things that I think many of us take for granted, because we have most of the parts of our personal lives are in good order, but what happens to you off the job can directly impact your ability to perform on the job. So for example, many of these folks that are overcoming these backgrounds may have housing insecurity. They may have food insecurity. They may have childcare issues that they have to deal with. They may have medical issues that they need to deal with. And these community organizations are set up to offer them support services in all those areas to make sure that those are in order so that they can be the best that they can be on the job. These organizations are also incredibly invested in you retaining that employee. And so what you also kind of get is almost a shadow human resources department that is invested in the relationship with you and invested in the success of that individual that you hire. So connecting with these organizations is going to be good for your organization and for that person that you hire as well. I quite often, I know that there's some folks here that have, I'll call it hire and fire ability for lack of a better term, but there's probably also some folks that are watching this right now who are thinking to themselves, okay, I don't have the ability to hire people. What can I do to help folks that may be coming from these backgrounds? And there's a few things you can do. So number one, you can advocate. And when I say advocate, I don't necessarily mean you go to the Capitol steps in Olympia and you hold a picket sign. When I say advocate, I mean on a personal level. We all probably know someone who is in recovery, or someone who has past criminal justice involvement, or someone who used to be homeless and is maybe trying to put their lives back together and move in the right direction. To the best of your ability, if you know someone or you see someone who is really trying to do the right things and change their life, step up and advocate on their behalf. What that means is if there's an opening at your company that you think they might be right for, let your supervisor know. To the best of your ability, try to get them a connection and get them an interview. Now, obviously, you have no control over what happens in that interview and how they come across in that interview, but to the best of your ability, try to get them in front of someone if possible. If you know someone in another company that has an opening that they may be right for, do the best that you can to support them, because in every single comeback story that we see, whether it's on TV, in a movie, or in real life, there is nobody ever does it alone. That person that is walking the road and making that comeback, always magically in their life, some person or some group shows up at just the right time to offer them the helping hand that they need. You can be that helping hand. It's one of the most important things that you can do. Tell management. Every once in a while, employers will ask their employees, what's important to you? What things do you think we should be doing differently? And if you're given that opportunity, tell management that you think it's important that they have equitable hiring practices, including offering opportunities for people that are in recovery from addiction, homelessness, or past criminal justice involvement. Now, they might not do anything about it, but if they ask you the question, you should absolutely take the opportunity to let them know that it's important to you. And if they hear it enough, maybe one day they will do something about it. You can volunteer. There's always a number of organizations in every community that are looking to help disadvantaged populations, always looking for volunteers. And that's a great way to give your time and incredibly satisfying also. You can also inspect your biases. And this, people often think that biases have something to do with race. Bias has nothing to do with race. We're biased against a lot of stuff. I'm biased against coffee cake. I don't like coffee cake. I like red velvet cake. So I'm biased against coffee cake. So inspect your biases. Think about what preconceived notions that you might have about certain groups of people and how that may be damaging to them, how it may be damaging to you. It may be preventing you from having more complete relationships in your life or meeting new people because you have these biases you're carrying around. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, when it comes to employers, get curious. More information hardly hurts. It's never hurt anybody, I don't think, having more information, as long as it was good information, at least. Getting more data about a situation doesn't really hurt. So get curious, ask questions if you don't know something. And that is, again, a very powerful thing that you can do to help bring you closer and know better the folks who may be going through these experiences. So I mentioned there's some community organizations. There's 2 statewide organizations where formerly incarcerated folks get help on reentry. And reentry is the process that people who have been formerly incarcerated go through to re-enter, quote unquote, regular society. So you're leaving the penal system, you're re-entering society. So there's 2 programs, one for formerly incarcerated veterans. About 8% of the prison and jail population in the United States are veterans. And then there's the Washington Statewide Reentry Council. And their links are both there. I'll make sure, John, that I provide you with these slides. So if folks want to go to those, they can. And then those community-based organizations. So Track Associates is an organization that operates, they have multiple locations. I think the one that's furthest south is in Tacoma, but they help individuals in the Olympia area as well. And they actually have locations all over the state. What's Next Washington is an advocacy organization founded by someone who used to be in the prison system, and they work tirelessly to connect with employers to educate them about the importance of second chance hiring and where they can find talent. And then, as I mentioned, Goodwill Industries does a bunch of workforce development and worker retraining, or if you just Google reentry services or worker retraining in your area, then you will certainly find a number of organizations besides the ones that I mentioned, hopefully, that would be able to point you in the right direction and would be happy, thrilled actually to work with you. And so just as a summary, second chance employment is all about fairness and opportunity. It's absolutely not about charity or handouts. I think employers should adjust their practices to be more inclusive. Second chance hiring has benefits for businesses, communities, and individuals, and you can help by advocating, speaking out, and inspecting your beliefs and biases as best you can. Here is my contact information. If you know anybody who is struggling to put their employment lives back together after addiction, homelessness, or past criminal justice involvement, or another important group are people that are still working, but their substance and alcohol use is causing them issues at work. All the the coaching and guidance that I provide individuals when it comes to employment issues is all 100% free of charge because I'm funded by donations. So if you know anyone who needs help, I'm certainly happy to provide any insight that I can and consult with them. Or if you want to make a donation, we'll take your money too. You can go to my website and make a donation and see the other work that we do. I am happy to take questions now. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ty. That's such a great presentation, and I should say, I first came across Ty's work through the Thurston County Chamber of Commerce, and really, yeah, I think it's really, really important for us to think about this and what it means for cooperatives to really engage in that principle of community, concern for community, but also social responsibility as one of the values. And yeah, please just come off mute if you have questions or reflections. I saw in the chat, Tori does ask if I think I'm not sure what it refers to, but if it also includes veterans.
Yeah, you were talking about how you're available to help anybody, and the groups that you called out were like were homeless, substance abuse, those kinds of things. And my question was, does that also include veterans? Because in my experience, I know quite a few veterans, and they fall into two camps. Either they manage to get government contracts and kind of continue to work, or they cannot apply their relevant people killing skills to work in the real world, and that's one of the big places where things start to go sideways with them. But there does seem to be a significant gap from what I've seen in terms of what the military provides on exit, especially for people who are not officers, right? People who are more like infantry and so forth.
Yes, I'm certainly happy to help them as well. When it comes specifically to veterans, because I am not a veteran, so I can't relate to many of their experiences. What that help for me might look like is me connecting them directly with folks who work with veterans. Yeah. Someone in the work source system or the employment security department system to get them the resources that they need.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, those don't really work very well. So.
Well, it depends on which part of the state you're in. So I will say that. I will say that. But I totally agree with you. In many cases, they can feel inadequate. Yeah. But I'm always happy to talk to anybody. Again, everything I do is absolutely no cost, very easy to schedule with, and very easy to get in touch with.
Nice. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else any reflections or thoughts, questions too? Just come off mute.
I think the other, sorry, go ahead, Michael.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
You could go, Michael.
Hey, Ty, thanks for meeting with us today. I appreciate your energy and enthusiasm and your vulnerability just in sharing your story with our smaller group today. My question to you is more, it's not specific to cooperatives, it's less specific to kind of the presentation, but could you share what the last, say, 3 years have done for your own personal sentiments of, the topic at hand, which we're constantly seeing, either in news outlets, media, whether it's what have you, situations where individuals across the country, across the world, you name it, have really been kind of continually victimized and punished, like you said, for some potential human mistakes that they've made in the past. And for me personally, it's a hard thing for me to expose myself to, because I oftentimes feel helpless and a part of the solution. And specific to this cooperative academy, I understand that from a hiring perspective, and you've offered some insightful tips for us to explore, certainly, in how we go about pursuing in soliciting forms of employment with people of various backgrounds. But what is your general sentiment over the last 3 years, and how do you, as a person dedicated to your recovery, kind of stay focused on what's best for you, but also contributing back to the community itself? And maybe more specific, a question that I would love for you to answer is, what is your morning routine? Because I feel like so often it's very easy to kind of get off track and kind of get into the woes of the world a little bit. And so how do you personally stay focused in your mission and your purpose?
Well, couple of things. Number one, I went through a lot of suffering, much of it self-imposed, quite frankly. But I feel like the reason why I went through that is so that I could talk to people about my experience. So as a result, I'm a member of a 12-step program, but I break my anonymity all the time. I stand on stages, I stand in front of groups of people and tell them that I'm in recovery and that, I used to be homeless and I used to be an addict. Because, the only way to break down that stigma is by being seen.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that the fact is that according to surveys, most people who have drug issues, those issues resolve themselves. About 75% of people who identify themselves at one time as having had a drug or alcohol problem say that they have recovered. So I think it's an important message for people to see that regardless of how bad things get, when they see that person who may be homeless on the street and think to themselves, that person ought to go get a job, because a lot of people think that.
Yeah.
Number one, it's not just about a job. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that needs to happen, a lot of other support that's needed. But it's possible to come back from that. And people who are committed to turning their lives around, that courage that it takes, that deserves some compassion. So, that's the thing that I try to lead with and keep in mind is, my absolute mission on this earth is to spread the message that change is possible. People deserve an opportunity to rebuild their lives and they need help doing that. The other thing, I avoid regular news, kind of like the plague. So I have a very small social media presence. I have a LinkedIn page. I have a Facebook page where I basically follow my family, but I don't see anybody else's posts. So I limit the amount of negative exposure that I get to stuff on a regular basis. My morning routine, I get up in the morning, I read 10 pages, have some orange juice or some water, and then kind of get on with my day usually. But my day is, there's some stuff I got to accomplish every day. I deal very well with regimen. So you kind of ask me, what's your daily routine? I deal very well with regimen. That's just the way that I'm built. Over the last 3 years, I have been disheartened at the public sentiment towards people who may be homeless. It seems like one of two things happens. Either there's an attitude of we should just provide every single service that we can, whether folks want to get help or not. And then there's the attitude that says that these people don't deserve our help. And I think that the answer is somewhere in the middle. I think you got to have the carrot of services and of an improved life, but you also got to have the stick. We're going to offer you all the help and all the support you need. But if you don't take it or are mentally unable to make a decision for yourself, then we need to step in and help you make some decisions. I think, those two things brought together is probably the long-term solution. What exactly that looks like, we can debate what that is, but I think that we need to have some sort of approach that does that. So over the last 3 years, that's been the thing that I have personally found most disheartening about the discussion is there's not a lot of nuance to it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing. It sounds like I think everyone at Trillium kind of feels this way too, but that one of the antidote to some of the polarization of thought in a lot of these topics is just simply showing humans compassion. And when you're thinking about that in the lens of, say, operating and running a business, I see too often companies that are maybe trying to walk the talk and trusting that they have good intentions to do so. But has anybody really kind of positioned themselves as the thought leader or the authentic, like true champion for that type of business ethics and values?
Well, yeah, I'll tell you who does a really great job with second chance employment is Mod Pizza. They do a fantastic job. It is baked into their culture. They decided early on that they were going to offer employment opportunity for people that have past criminal justice involvement and people in recovery. I know several people that started out, working at Mod Pizza, cooking pizzas in the back or as cashiers, and now they're store managers or they're district managers. It is literally in their culture. So they have done a great job of not only talking the talk, but walking the walk and providing opportunities for folks. They're the most public one. There are other companies, I'm sure, that have done it as well. It's just that not every company wants to be known as doing it. Not every company wants to be known as a second chance employer because they're afraid of the blowback that they may get from the community from some people who may be a little more judgmental than they should be.
Sure.
And they're afraid of, they're in some cases, they're also afraid that if their employees know that they're hiring folks that have past criminal justice involvement, that they may not want to work there. Now, surveys show that those two fears are absolutely unfounded because overwhelmingly people say that they would feel comfortable doing business with companies who hire people who have past criminal convictions, and workers overwhelmingly say that they would be comfortable working in places with folks who have past criminal convictions, but still those fears and that stigma sticks around.
Gotcha. And then maybe my last question, I'll hand it back over to Tori. In reflecting back on like the life quakes that you've experienced and the transition away from, say, that experience that you had with a Fortune 50 company and, the role that you had, and now working in a nonprofit space, what's been the biggest takeaways from that transition and on your heart?
Well, I think, when I was in the corporate space, it was all about me. Me, my paycheck, my recognition, my awards, my customers, but not because I got into nonprofit, but I part of that painful journey was also a personal evolution.
Yeah.
And that personal evolution resulted in me wanting to be in a place where I could help other people who are having that same experience or similar experience. Because there's a lot of us. There's a ton of people that are going through the same thing. And at some point, they're going to have to put their lives back together. And as a result, I actually ended up, I mentioned, a little bit that manufacturing company that I interviewed with that actually got curious and asked about me. I got that job and I worked for them in outside sales for 3 years and did great work for them. And I just got to the point, I basically got to the point that I needed to leave the company, not because they were a bad company or I didn't like what I was doing, but I needed to be in a place where I felt like I was giving back and making a difference in people's lives. And me selling the next widget wasn't giving me the juice of that, right? And so it was an evolution that got me to really consider the nonprofit world and how I could give back to folks. But I very often say that while the journey that I've been on is super painful, the only thing I would take back is the pain that I caused my friends and my family. Sure. All the suffering that I endured wouldn't change it for a minute. Right. If I had to do it all over again, I'd take the exact same suffering because it has brought me to a place where I see that it's about more than just me.
Yeah. Well, I applaud you for feeling that way. I mean, I can relate to that on some level, and finding purpose in your work is a beautiful thing. So, and I can see that in the way that you show up on this virtual call. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take it away, Tori.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in with my last question. So first of all, like I'm all in. Like we don't have any kind of questions on our hiring process that are about like do you have any past criminal convictions or things like that? Because I'm all about like who are the you that shows up now? Because we are all a product of our life experiences, and those life experiences are not fair on so many levels. So, but my question is more specific, is because I actually had an instance where because we don't ask those questions, I did not find out. So the work that we do with one of our clients, in order for them to get access to our clients' network, they have to go through a background check. And that background check showed me that there was a previous conviction that I was not aware of. And basically, in order for us to be able to move forward with this client, I basically had to say as a company that I approve this person. Like, I know that they did something. I don't actually know all the details. I don't need to know all the details, but I know that they did something. And I say it's okay for them to continue for them to work with this client, which basically shifts that responsibility should anything happen to me as a company. And I feel like I'm probably fine with that. Like, but I doubt that they're, whatever. But any resources or advice or guidance you have on like what I should, like, basically, how can I prepare for that? How can I support that? How can I understand kind of what my liability is associated with that? Because I do not want somebody's previous record to inform their ability to work with some of our clients. And there's definitely some ways that I could work around, like knowing now, I would say, well, I just wouldn't submit them for that. And I would make sure that the work that they do fits into this different box so that it doesn't kind of trigger those things. But for this one, I was just kind of like, oh, I'm just gonna click that button and hope everything's gonna be okay in the future. But do you have any advice around kind of how to deal with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it gets back to what I call right person, right job. Right. And I'm going to use an example from a previous speech that I did to address your question. So in one of the speeches I did previously, a gentleman spoke up at the end. It was a speech about bias in hiring. And a gentleman spoke up at the end and said, I own a construction company. We do work that's both inside people's houses and outside people's houses. And I'll tell you, I have a bias against hiring people that are in recovery, people that have past criminal justice involvement, because all it takes for my business to be tanked is for us to get one bad review online saying that somebody stole something. And then I'm totally screwed. And my answer to him was, well, there's a right person, right job. So if you have concerns about a particular candidate, then maybe what that means is they don't work inside, they work outside. Yeah. So it kind of goes back to what you were talking about. There are certain positions that, maybe it's not appropriate for someone to have. Maybe it's not appropriate for them to have unsupervised access to a vulnerable population if they have a certain type of criminal transgression in their background. Yeah. Maybe there's not a right job for that person. But until we get curious enough to consider the possibilities, we're not going to know that, right? So, I would, some companies have also gone to something like, effectively a scorecard when they're dealing, when they run across applicants that have past criminal justice involvement, and that scorecard will take into account, okay, so the crime happened more than 5 years ago, so they get 20 points for that. The crime was a misdemeanor, so they get 10 points for that. And so they have this system that they put in place that does a couple of things. Number one, it removes the bias that someone might have from that process, and basically says, if these are the things that we think are important. If your total combined score is above this number, then you're a go. If you're below this number, then you're a no. But number one, it removes bias from the process. The other thing is that it protects you legally. Yeah. If anybody ever has a question about, I didn't get this job and they discriminated against me because of my criminal background, you now have a system you can point to and say, well, actually, we have a number of criteria that we use to determine what's important to us. And even though we liked you, because of your criminal history, you just didn't meet it here. And also, no today doesn't mean no forever, because that score might change in a year. So if you come back to us in a year, that score might be different. So I hope that kind of answers the question a little bit.
It does. The follow-up question I have for that is like, how do I balance being kind of collecting the information that I would want to collect in order to be able to kind of paint the right corners so that I can create an opportunity for somebody and not necessarily expose them to something that is potentially triggering or exposing my company to risk. So how can I do that while maintaining, while respecting their privacy and that they might not want to share, and like, yeah. I've screwed up. Like, the only reason I haven't ended up arrested is literally because I'm a white woman and the arresting officer knew my grandmother, right? Literally, right. Textbook white privilege. And so I'm not going to judge anybody, but I want to be respectful of, I don't know how to phrase that. But basically, I want to be able to do it, but I want to ask the questions, but I also don't want to ask questions that are not appropriate.
Yeah. Do you you mentioned that there was a part of your you do business with someone else, and so you had to have a criminal background check. Do you run criminal background checks in the normal course of your hiring? Okay. Nope. And so,
no, I don't want to do that. I don't.
No, that's great. If you don't want to do that, my advice to you then would be, if you run into a situation where you have to pull this background check and you notice somebody has a background, that you establish specific carved out positions where that basically, regardless of background, you can put somebody in it. Yeah. Which is going to limit. It's going to still provide them opportunity, but it's going to limit your liability as well.
Yeah. Okay. And then my follow-up question is that the work that we do is highly specialized in terms of we develop training programs for other people.
Yeah.
And if you know anybody that is in that has done training work, instructional design, that's in your kind of pool of people that you're working with, send them our way. I mean,
Okay.
we've got, like, we're working on building out an apprenticeship program also to help people kind of career change into the space if they've got kind of a different, a core set of skills that is relevant to what we do, but have never done what we do before.
Yeah.
It is pretty specialized though in terms of writing, but like I don't have any requirements about like degrees or passing a criminal background check or any of that. I mean, we're pretty wide open with applicants.
Yeah, Tori, could you, I just dropped my full contact info in
Yeah,
the,
I'll add you.
I encourage you to connect with me on LinkedIn as well. If you could email me some info on that, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're in the process of doing quite a few transitions in the organization as a whole. So I'm not like hiring right now, but one of the things
Sure.
that we are working towards is building out what that apprenticeship program looks like. So if we've got opportunities, I would love to like help people take advantage of those.
I love it. Thank you.
All right.
That was
Well,
all my
thank you
questions.
so
Now
much.
that
That
I've
was,
monopolized so much of that.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks for being so engaged.
That was really wonderful. Further, Evan, did you want to jump in at all before we let Ty go and move on to the next segment?
I just really appreciated listening, and as somebody who has had a DUI in my past and being lucky enough, I know I really got through something that would have destroyed a lot of people. And part of that was because of my privilege, and I had a clean driving record. I had never done anything wrong. And I just got real lucky. And I think giving people the opportunity to pull themselves out from their bad spaces is really important. And I've also had employees who obviously are having substance abuse issues coming into work in a very manic, weird state of being. And in dealing with that, I've had real direct communication and actually separated employees from, because their impact on their other workers at a certain point, it just was not okay. But in doing that, I was really careful to not demonize or villainize that person. We went through a process of acknowledging the behavior. We had a written thing. We had various conversations. But it was really, it really hurt my heart to let that person go, because when they were on point, they were a really good baker and a good person, but they just were not holding it together. And it's really, it's a hard thing, because our society and the reality of the world is that people get really stressed out and they get in bad places. And I just think to not dehumanize people and be honest and straightforward is the best thing that you can do. And I don't know, it just kind of, it's we don't do a background check on people. But I've had some people OD and pass away who used to work here. I don't know. It touches my heart pretty deeply, and I don't have any answers except for to just try to stay human. And to be clear and understanding about where your boundaries are with business, without losing the human element of caring about people, I guess, is kind of what it brought up with me.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Mhm.
I absolutely agree.
I think the fact that you do your whole thing free of funding or without charging the people that need help is really glorious and admirable and wonderful. And we need more of those kind of approaches, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, just to wrap up this portion, I just want to say, one of the spiritual founder of Mondragon often talked about in Spain often talks about the co-ops are as much about human development as economic development. In fact, the whole point of economic development is to create human development and to help people be the best human that they can be. And I think this is a great way, and one of the reasons why I wanted to bring it in to our discussion. You know, the conversion process can be very transactional, but you're also trying to create a new organization that's very human centric. So I think it's important to keep that space while we're going through the process of creating a purchase and sale agreement and articles and bylaws, that we need to also think about what that new organization is going to be and what its culture is going to be. And so that's part of the reason of having discussions like this as part of the Conversion Academy. And I really want to thank you, Ty. This is a great presentation. It's
Thank
my
you.
second time going through it, and really even got more and more. It's really wonderful. So
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for all the great questions and comments too.
All right. Well, have a wonderful day. I hope you feel better. And
me too. First cold in about 2.5 years. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Okay. Let's see. And so what we're going to do for the rest of our time today, I just want to, it's what I left off last week. I want to talk a little bit about, you know, discrimination, harassment, kind of piggybacking on Ty's presentation. And I need to get my presentation up here. So hopefully my screen will not freeze and everything will work nicely. And okay, and I think, and my screen froze. All right, so hopefully this will kick in a second here, but yeah, what I want to talk about is basically working around the cooperative, you know, values and principles in terms of how we engage anti-harassment and discrimination, and really with a focus on the legal aspects of that. As we're moving into our cooperative model and as a business, what's going on here? Let me get my slideshow going. You know, really engaging in, you know, these concepts of solidarity, equality, and equity. And so, first thing I want to talk about is this concept of bias. And there's this nice metaphor that I learned a few years ago that I love called the ladder of inference. And this is basically, you know, how humans, and our brains are constantly working, very often not always consciously, subconsciously, that we're observing external data and occurrences, and then we filter that because we can't take in everything at once and make sense of it. And we make assumptions based on those things that come through the filter and connect it to other things we know and meanings and things that we've learned in our whole life through our culture, through society, and draw conclusions. And then that refines our whole experience. And we take actions based on that and the adopted beliefs. And so this all ends up being this reflective loop, right? So you go through this process and then it comes back around and we either engage in confirmation bias, right? Or we maybe are adjusting things as we go. And so I know sometimes in the workplace, this can mean, you know, you're not always getting all the information that you see. Like I know very often, you know, in my old workplace, people would be accused of always slacking off or not working, but it was more that the person was walking by an office and it just happened, you know, they would look in the office and decide that the person that wasn't looking like they were working. So they would just make these assumptions. And this is, you know, this is again, bias. It really doesn't have anything to do with race or gender, except that systemically we know that there are these systems that create that belief structure and sets up expectations and assumptions that we are unconsciously working off of. So this ladder of inference is something that if we can be reflective of, or aware of it and think about it as we go through, it can help us sort of break down the ladder, as it were, and not succumb to that reflexive loop. Specifically, though, what I want to talk about today is what are protected classifications. And this kind of ties into the voluntary and open membership, first principle of cooperatives. So voluntary and open membership is essentially says that as long as somebody has the ability and willingness to engage, to take on the responsibility of membership, they should be able to join the cooperative. So what that means is that the cooperative shouldn't really be looking at things that don't really engage the act of what the co-op's doing. So if you're, a cab driving co-op, being able to drive a car is part of the responsibility of membership, but maybe none of these other things are. So in the United States and at the state level, there are certain classifications that have been protected under law. So these are the ones at the federal level: race, color, religion, national origin. Age is for people 40 and over. Pregnancy status, citizenship, family status, disability, etc. Genetic information, and sex and gender. At the state level, they have all of those federal classifications come in, but there's also these other set: maternity, HIV, AIDS, C status, gender identity, military status. There's also some whistleblower. Other states have different protections. So like where I used to live in Wisconsin, they actually had a protected class for criminal background. As long as it was unrelated to the work being done, you could not use someone's criminal background to deny them work or housing, right? So that's the other part of it, that these are not just for work, but they're also for housing as well. And then, and so what this means is that as you're doing your job, your business is, and writing policies, you need to make sure that this isn't happening. So there's one cooperative that I know of as an example where they took this in a way that it really wasn't intended. So they had a customer that had a bias against basically gay men and didn't want gay men providing services to them. And so they felt the argument was that they couldn't, that they had to honor that request because of the religious protected class, but really it's the other way around. It's not what customers want. You have to respect, of course, and not discriminate against customers because of protected classes, but your role as an employer is specifically to protect the workers from discrimination. And so, denying people work based on these statuses is where you can get into a lot of trouble. And so also defining the difference between discrimination and harassment. And so these protected characteristics are used in these two sets. So discrimination is specifically these items: refusing to hire a person because of one of these characteristics, discharging or barring a person from a job within the organization because of a protected characteristic, having different pay scales that are based on these, or conditions of employment, but also using this in some sort of hiring process or other work process that in any way creates a situation in which someone is not able to have the same access to job employment or a work life that other members of the employment community have. Harassment is a little bit different. Usually harassment is primarily aimed at gender or sex of an individual. There's discrimination element to harassment, which is again follows the previous definition of discrimination, but it's also about creating a hostile work environment or a quid pro quo of requiring sexual acts for promotion, a raise, not being fired, etc. So the hostile work environment can sometimes be very obvious, with physical intimidation or attacks, but it can also be very subtle. So it can be very similar to bullying, leaving notes on people's lockers, or I know one incident where a mechanic in the organization I know came to work and their work boots were full of oil. Things like that are kind of things that make it very the workplace mean-spirited and alienating and kind of trying to force people to quit. These are all things that can be harassment. And so thinking about this is creating policies. I put some example policies in the folder, the one for discrimination and one for harassment. So one of the keys of harassment is, and I should, well, before we get to this, is that the intent of the abuser doesn't really matter. It's really how the person who is experiencing the harassment engages it. And so usually when these investigations are done by either groups by the Washington Human Rights Commission or internally within the organization, there's this predominance of understanding what the effect of the actions were on the person who's bringing the complaint, not on the intent of what the accused person was claiming that they were trying to do. And it's important to understand that, and it's important because we need to work to create that safe place. In Washington, there's the Human Rights Commission that tends to do these hearings and overseas. So if this is something that cannot be resolved internally within the organization, it can be resolved at the state level. And this usually means that a lot of expense and for the organization. It can also mean that there might be orders on how to change policies, et cetera. And so, but I should say one of the big issues that tends to get things into this arena and also into other courts is retaliation. So one of the big issues around harassment is sometimes not just the act of harassment, but then once the person makes a complaint, that the harassment either continues or intensifies in retaliation for the complaint being made. And this is often where a lot of the major costs and punishments against organizations come about. And so, and this would be one of the things that would be brought up in the Human Rights Commission that creates this sort of outside independent body that looks at it. So we want to give some examples that come from my life as a manager, and just give people, maybe open it up and just get people's thoughts on where. The first one, both of these happened, but we received a complaint of a African-American passenger and a white passenger in a cab. They were on their way home from a tavern, and they claimed the driver kicked them out because of his race. The female driver, who's white, said it was because they were intoxicated and creating a hostile work environment. Basically, she felt they were kind of hitting on her, and it made her scared for her safety. So she counterclaimed that she was being sexually harassed. So here, as a manager of a co-op, having to kind of thread the needle on two complaints that are happening from the same incident, and I'm trying to figure out what's the course of action to do. I don't know if anyone wants to take a guess on how things got resolved, or what would be some of your questions if you were confronted with this basic scenario. You know
what? I'm not, well,
I'm not giving you a lot here, but what would be some of your initial questions that you might have?
So you're saying that there were two people in the cab. One was African American, one was both passengers, one was white, and they say that they were kicked them out because of
the African Americans passengers race, right?
Oh, okay. But the driver,
and the driver is female.
Right.
Yeah, and the driver's like she counterclaimed that she was being I guess I would have to side with the driver. I don't know. That's hard because is there any other information?
Well,
Can you
this,
verify?
yeah, so, I mean, this is one where, you come in on a Monday morning as a manager and you have this complaint sitting on your desk, and then you have to spend the week dealing with it. And, what are some of the issues, right? So you're definitely interviewing the driver to find out what's going on. Um,
Was the pickup from a bar?
It was from a bar, but,
It doesn't imply that they were drunk, but that's,
Right.
I'm just
Assumption.
saying.
Right?
And time? You know what time they
It
were
was-
getting
It
picked up?
wasn't super late. It was like 10, 11 p.m., but not super, super late. So, yeah, in this case, I think, ultimately, well, this one got pretty weird because the dispatch office decided to just side with the driver and not listen to the complaint. And by Monday morning, it had blown up into a much bigger issue. But, in this, it was kind of like finding a way to honor the driver, but also work with the passenger. So, like, what I thought could have been done would have been to simply compensate the driver for their time for the ride, and so that they're not lost, they haven't lost any income, but then also send another cab for the passengers and get them home. But to me, that would have been a way of dealing with it. And then whatever internal issues still needed to be dealt with, we could sort out. But we
Well, and that would have also given a second reference for the state of these people. Right? If you had
Right.
sent a second cab, then you would be like, the other driver could be like, yeah, they were out of line.
Exactly.
But as the employer, I also kind of feel like you have a responsibility to make sure your driver is safe.
Absolutely.
And so it is kind of complex. I mean, especially in the work environment, which is their car, which is mobile, their cab. It's not the same as like in a workspace like here where, we'll have 3 or 4 people and we can see the Karen come in and make that problem. And people are like, whoa, that person was like being really mean or whatever. Or so.
Yeah, so I just think the point is here is that, sometimes it's not as cut and dry, and sometimes, you have to really think about what you're doing. The way this actually worked out is that, like I said, the dispatcher decided to defend the driver, refused to send another cab. The next morning, they called and talked to the operations manager who defended the dispatcher and the driver. That made the passenger feel like they were totally being disregarded. They happened to also be engaged in the music scene in Madison, which a lot of drivers were too. So by the time I saw it Monday morning, there was a social media frenzy talking about how Union Cab was discriminating against people, and it ended up going to the Equal Opportunities Commission, and we ended up settling with the passenger for $3,000. And the driver, that was fine. We talked with it. We didn't feel that she had done anything necessarily super wrong, but it probably could have been handled better that night.
$2,000 for losing a.
Well, it's not for not getting the ride. It's for
Yeah.
not being respected as a person. So. Yeah, so that's one. This is the other one, though.
That's complex.
Yeah, this is a member of our board of directors was fired for sexual harassment after making statements to various employees in the break room that a coworker was getting paid to breastfeed. They complained about it creating a hostile work environment, and so the person was essentially fired for making the statements after they were about this. The director, the person who was actually a worker, but also on the board of directors, then sued under the National Labor Relations Act, because the National Labor Relations Act specifically gives workers a legal right to discuss workplace grievances. So in this case, by talking about the complaint in the break room to anyone that would listen to them, they were creating that hostile work environment and retaliation. But the other law at the federal level, the National Labor Relations Act suggests that people have a right to discuss grievances. So this is another one that is kind of thinking, what are potential outcomes, or how did this kind of get broken down? And the main reason I'm sharing this is to show that it's not always very clean and cut. Sometimes you have to choose which laws to honor and which ones to, fudge a little bit more on, because they can be conflicting. And like Ty said, there are a lot of laws in this country, probably more than there need to be, but usually that's because there are lawsuits that create those laws.
So it is really hard for me to not on both of these fall on the side of the female, because the overwhelming prevalence of sexual assault and that you see just in the statistics from women make it really, really challenging as a woman to to not, to not see this female perspective, having had some exceedingly similar experiences, as I'm sure pretty much every other woman every other female bodied person walking the earth has.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually agree. So, I mean, in the second one, again, it is, there are these two conflicting laws, and the co-op, sided with the woman making the complaint, and the director was fired, and we had to go before the National Labor Review Board for a hearing, and we ended up winning. We actually ended up winning because as a cooperative, the National Labor Relations Board said that the low threshold to become a member, which was $25 and working at the co-op, the ability for the members to get on the board of directors, as governance body, the low threshold for the membership to be able to control and remove directors when they felt like it, and then the control that the board had over the management structure of the co-op essentially exempted the workers of the company from the National Labor Relations Act. So as a result, at least going forward, that gave some really clear guidance to the co-op that we could ignore that part of the National Labor Relations Act when we needed to. I mean, obviously we weren't going to suppress people, speech on the workplace, but if there's a choice between follow Equal Opportunities Act and the National Labor Relations Act, we were able to we could choose to follow the equal opportunities instead of the NLRA. So
yeah, and there's also an issue of these are not on parity in terms of like the worst case scenario of both of these perspectives, right? So if somebody's upset about grievances, like because they're unhappy seeing a tit, does not have the same sort of risk associated with.
Right, and the irony of this too is that the complaint the person was making, I'm phrasing it not the way they said it. The way they said it was that the person was stealing from the co-op, and they meant stealing time from the co-op. But this person also worked in the accounting office, so it was a pretty big thing to be saying in the workplace, that someone in the accounting office is stealing. And ironically, this person was doing it while they were punched in, also in the accounting office, but they were in the break room talking about it. So they were effectively doing the very thing that they were accusing the other person of, but that nuance was lost on them.
Just in general, people who don't support babies really suck. Just in my personal
Amen.
Yes. Like, who can be down on babies? I don't get that.
Yeah, so anyways, I mean, I want to bring these up because these are areas where these protected classifications are really important. So, the key is to focus on behavior and really what is happening in the behavior front, and also understanding that you're not always going to have all the information because you can't always be there when it's happening. And so sometimes it's, trying to balance protecting the organization and its members, but also the individual worker too, and trying to make that balance out. And it's not always easy. that's kind of comes to, where I want to just talk, and this isn't going to be much longer today, but, talk about policy development. So when we're, when you're writing policies, it's really important, thinking about what Ty talked about, what we talked about last week, talking about, just general biases and thought, and thinking about how do we write our policies that really focus on, the personal behavior, but avoid, some of these systemic and cultural issues. So this is kind of the iceberg metaphor. Some people may have seen it, but it talks about, when we talk about biases and discrimination and oppression, right? Think of it as an iceberg, right? At the top, you see that's the individual part, the conscious part, that part of the brain that filters the information that we see and makes those decisions. And that, generally speaking, is what is easiest for us to see when it comes to things like sexism and racism, because it's present, it's in your face, and it can be obvious. But then underneath that, right, the tip of the iceberg is just that. It's the tip. There's this huge structure underneath it, and that's where, the laws and rules of society, and also the cultural norms that have built up over, in this country, right, since almost 400 years, right, that includes slavery and Jim Crow laws and et cetera, builds in this other aspect of how we filter and engage in that ladder of inference. And so, writing policies then, I think, really has to focus in on really thinking about what are the needs of the organization, and trying to also recognize when, as you're writing it, where your blinders are there getting input from members, not just writing it, you can take your policy book as it is now, and certainly just use it once the conversion happens. But I really encourage to kind of get a subcommittee of the buyout committee or staff to kind of go through there and think about, are these things really working, and is this really how we want to approach stuff? And you might have to add new policies too, right? Right now, it might just be, hiring might just be done by the owner, and it might just be based on the owner's process. You might want to create a hiring policy. Like, how do you hire? How do you handle probation and evaluations, and some of the things we talked about last week? And what is a way to kind of break it down so that you're not sort of recreating these systems that are not really helpful or engaged in human development? And I think, again, thinking about how do your policies help your members really become the best members they can be, which is essentially the same as, I think, for them becoming their best human, right? And so that's kind of where I want to leave it at. I do want to talk about, there are organizations out there that specialize in this. AORTA, which stands for the Anti-Oppression Resource and Training Alliance. They do individual trainings. They also do other programming. Normally we have them speak. I didn't have time to really get a hold of them. They were doing some other processes. Otherwise, I would have usually liked to bring them in to actually do the presentation. But they are really great to work with. And if you want to, at some point, engage in a deeper sort of discussion with your organization, I really highly recommend it. That is my shorter presentation today. I really wanted to give most of the time today to Ty, and yeah, I don't know if okay. I like that, having a fern who will lovingly call anyone out for bias. That's very good.
He's basically like our anti-bias officer or our bias awareness officer. Like, did you realize that what you said might be offensive to someone?
And for larger organizations, it might actually be good to have a small committee that works to do that too. But yeah, I think that's a great idea. Okay, we had a small crowd today, so we can end a little bit early. Like I said, we're going to take next 2 weeks off for people to work on your articles, your bylaws, your whole processes. We're going to come back, do kind of a review on May 5th, and also maybe engage in some hopefully inspirational planning to help people get to the next phase, which again, we really hope that we can, get you to the conversion process soon this summer. That's one of the goals, but as close as we can get. And thank you for sticking in. I realize 9 consecutive Thursdays is a lot of time to commit, but I think hopefully at the end of it, we will have increased or moved the process along a little bit faster than it might normally have gone. Is there any other comments or reflections? Otherwise, we can call it an afternoon.
Hey, John.
I really appreciated having Ty's presentation. That was informative. And I apologize for coming in late. And when I first came in, I was like, why are we talking about this? And then it became clear. But it was really helpful. And it's good to connect with him too.
Is there some kind of incentive for people to like make sure they come back for that 10th?
I don't know. I have to think of maybe we'll have to think of one. Maybe we can figure something out. Okay. I will think about that. Maybe we'll have some sort of prize or something. Okay.
Cookies.
I'm sorry.
Cookies.
Oh well, if
I always motivate people with cookies, but I say something like, "I see cookies in your future," and they're like, "Oh, well, then."
well, there's Diane. It's one of your.
Oh,
And I was gonna
yeah.
say, are you Blue Heron? Because I love your cookies. I get them at
Thank you.
Jay's farm stand all the time.
See, I told you.
The spelt cookies are the chocolate spelt ones are my favorite.
That's a great cookie.
It really is.
I don't like what's happening with maple syrup prices, but we'll keep making them.
Okay, so I should say too, wasn't really on my radar, but apparently a week from Saturday, there's going to be a small get together of co-ops for Co-op-Utopia.
Oh, yeah. So it's the same as Arts Walk is going on. It's the same day as Arts Walk downtown.
It'll be in our parking lot, I think, right? Is that? And so
When is that?
It's the 23rd. Is that Saturday the 23rd?
Or Friday the 22nd.
Right, we'll be on Saturday, the 23rd,
okay.
in the afternoon from 1 to 4. And it'll be a chance to meet with other local co-ops and chat with them about how their co-op works and just learn more about it. And definitely you're welcome to show up and participate.
Can you send some information? Are you going to email some information about it? How do
Sure.
I? Yeah,
Sure.
that'd be awesome.
Absolutely. Okay, doke.
Thanks all.
Hello there.
Thank
you so
you.
much, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.